The phone rang deep inside Clarence's house long after midnight. A single, shrill tone that cut through the silence of royal walls. A sound no one ever expected to hear on a night so quiet it almost felt staged. King Charles stirred, half awake, thinking it must be an emergency from the palace, another security briefing, or perhaps an aide calling about a family health scare. But when he picked up the receiver, there was only one sound on the other end: breathing. Heavy, slow, deliberate breathing. Then a voice he recognized instantly. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Father, the voice said, you don't deserve that crown. You destroyed this family. And if it's the last thing I do, the words faltered, then came sharp, cutting, unforgettable. I must kill you. Silence. Imagine that moment. A father frozen by shock, unable to breathe, unable to move. The King of England, a man who had survived decades of scandals, whispers, and betrayals, hearing those words from his own son. Not an enemy of the crown, not a protester in the streets. His own blood. Prince Harry. You might think this sounds like fiction, an exaggeration spun by the media. But what if it wasn't? What if that phone call was real, and its echo still haunts the corridors of the monarchy today? Because behind the gilded gates, far from the smiles and photo ops, a storm has been brewing. A war between father and son, love and hatred, crown and conscience. And tonight, you'll hear how that war reached the point of no return. This isn't just about a family argument. This is about the collapse of the world's most famous dynasty, and how one man's fury nearly set it all on fire. So what really happened that night? What drove Harry to the edge? And why has King Charles, after years of silence and forgiveness, decided to finally take his own son to court? Let's rewind. For years, the tension had been building, quietly, invisibly. From the day Harry walked away from the royal family, he had been haunted by two competing identities: the rebel prince and the wounded son. In public, he spoke of healing. In private, those who knew him best say he spoke of revenge. He once told a close friend, "They think they can erase me, but I'll erase them first." At first, it sounded like frustration, a man struggling under the weight of centuries of expectation. But frustration turned into obsession, and obsession turned into rage. After the publication of his memoir, Spare, Harry's relationship with the palace deteriorated faster than anyone could have predicted. Every word he wrote, every interview he gave, seemed designed to hurt the very people he once called family. His brother became the enemy. His father, cold and unfeeling. His stepmother, dangerous. But there was one word in particular that royal insiders say changed everything: betrayal. In the royal world, betrayal isn't just personal, it's political. And for King Charles, it cut deeper than any tabloid headline. He had forgiven Harry before, for the interviews, for the Netflix deals, even for the memoir. But what he couldn't forgive was the threat. Because the moment those words were spoken, the feud wasn't just emotional anymore. It was criminal. The monarchy had survived wars, divorces, and abdications. But this? A prince threatening the life of a king? That was unprecedented. Still, Charles didn't react immediately. Those who were inside Clarence's house that night say the king sat motionless for nearly an hour after hanging up. He didn't call security. He didn't call William. He simply stared at the crown resting on his desk, the symbol of everything that had divided them. He whispered, "Where did I go wrong?" And perhaps that's the real tragedy here. Because beneath the crown and chaos, this was still a father asking how love turned into hatred. But not everyone saw it that way. The palace staff panicked. Security was reinforced, calls were logged, and a secret internal document, marked Threat Protocol Red, was drafted. For the first time in modern royal history, the threat came not from outside the palace walls, but from within. And it didn't end there. In the days that followed, the royal communications team was in crisis mode. Rumors started leaking, whispers about a disturbing late-night call and a direct threat to the monarch. But no one dared name the source. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan were thousands of miles away in California, smiling for cameras at a charity event, pretending everything was fine. But was it? Behind those smiles, insiders say Harry was unraveling. The calls grew darker, more erratic. His private messages became more aggressive. Friends described him as paranoid, angry, unrecognizable. And then came the recording. Someone, to this day, no one knows who recorded that phone call. A short, chilling clip lasting less than 30 seconds. And when the palace heard it, the decision was made. Legal action would be prepared, quietly, discreetly. Because if the world ever heard those words, the crown might never recover. Now here's where it gets complicated. Some say the threat was metaphorical, that Harry never meant literal violence, that he was speaking emotionally, venting decades of resentment. But others, including several senior advisors, weren't so sure. They had seen the signs long before that call: the fiery temper, the impulsive reactions, the long nights filled with alcohol and anger. Even Meghan, sources claim, began to distance herself from his outbursts. One palace aide recalled, "There was a look in his eyes we'd never seen before. It wasn't sadness. It was fury. And fury, when directed at a king, becomes danger." For King Charles, the days that followed were a blur. Meetings with lawyers, secret calls with MI5, and a growing realization that this wasn't just a family crisis, it was a constitutional one. Because if the monarch is under threat, even from his own blood, the government must act. Still, Charles hesitated. The father in him wanted to protect his son. The king in him knew he couldn't. He reportedly told a confidant, "If I let this go, the monarchy will fall with me." But even as the king prepared his next move, something strange happened. The story began to leak. First, small blogs. Then tabloid whispers. Then an American podcast claimed to have explosive evidence of a royal threat. Within hours, #KillTheKing trended online, forcing Buckingham Palace into full lockdown mode. The irony was unbearable. The monarchy built on secrecy, now bleeding from its own walls. And amid the chaos, one question echoed louder than any other. Why would Harry go this far? Some point to Meghan's growing influence, that her frustration with the royal system had become Harry's war cry. Others believe it was grief, unresolved pain from his mother's death, twisted over years into resentment against his father. But there's another theory, darker, quieter, more unsettling, that Harry believed destroying the monarchy was the only way to free himself from it. "He doesn't want to inherit power," said a former palace staffer. "He wants to burn the whole system down." And maybe, in his mind, threatening the king wasn't madness, it was justice. Still, as the dust settled, the king's response shocked everyone. He didn't call a public press conference. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't even speak to Harry. Instead, he summoned a private meeting with his most trusted advisors. What happened in that meeting remains one of the most closely guarded royal secrets. But one insider later revealed a chilling detail. When Charles left the room, he said quietly, "I will protect the crown, even if it means losing my son." It was no longer father versus son. It was king versus traitor. And yet, behind all the protocol, the heartbreak was real. Imagine sitting across from your child in court, the same child you once carried, once protected, now standing as your adversary. That's the emotional wound that this royal family is now hiding beneath polished smiles. But there's another side to this story, one that few have heard. Because according to confidential sources, the king's legal team wasn't just preparing a civil case. They were also investigating whether a criminal charge could apply under the Treason Act, an ancient law that, unbelievably, still carries the gravest of consequences. For centuries, the crown has punished threats from outsiders, but never, not once, from within. Until now. This is where the story turns from tragedy to history. Because the case King Charles is quietly building may not just expose the truth, it may redefine the monarchy itself. And as the evidence piles up, recordings, text messages, witness statements, one thing becomes clear: the threat wasn't isolated. It was part of something far larger, far more deliberate. Someone, somewhere, had been pushing Harry toward the edge. Was it manipulation? Was it mental decline? Or was it part of a carefully orchestrated plan to bring the monarchy to its knees? Those are the questions Buckingham Palace refuses to answer, and the same questions that will drive this story deeper than ever before. Because in the coming chapters, we're going to uncover how a prince's pain became the monarchy's greatest danger. We'll look inside the secret intelligence briefings, the hidden recordings, and the explosive courtroom documents that the palace tried to bury. But before we go there, remember this. Every story about the royal family hides one truth. Nothing happens by accident. Every leak, every scandal, Every silence has a purpose. And this was planned with precision. The night Harry allegedly made that call wasn't random. It happened hours after a classified meeting at Buckingham Palace, a meeting that, if leaked, could have ended Meghan Markle's entire brand overnight. Coincidence? Maybe. But palace insiders don't believe in coincidences. Because that night didn't just mark the breaking point between father and son. It set off a chain of events that would drag the entire royal institution into chaos. And when you discover what was really said inside that palace meeting, you'll understand why King Charles finally decided to fight back, not as a father, but as a monarch. Because forgiveness has limits, even for a king. It was one of those nights when London slept in uneasy silence, a stillness so thick you could almost hear the heartbeat of the city beneath it. Rain fell in slow, lazy streaks down the windows of Clarence House, where King Charles sat alone at his mahogany desk. The lights were dim, the air heavy with the scent of old books and the faint hum of a grandfather clock ticking in the corner. He wasn't supposed to be awake. His advisors had long begged him to rest more, to take things slowly after his recent health scares. But that night, sleep refused him. Something, he couldn't explain what, felt off. A kind of disturbance that royal men of his line had learned to sense before disaster. And then, at precisely 12:47 a.m., the telephone rang. Not his personal assistant's line. Not the palace emergency line. His direct private line, the one reserved for family. He stared at it for a moment. Only 3 people in the world had that number: Prince William, Prince Harry, and Camilla. When he finally picked up, his voice was weary but kind. Hello? Who is this? What he heard next would become the most haunting sound of his life. At first, nothing but static. Then a low breath. Then a whisper. Father. The word hung in the air like a ghost. Harry. The voice on the other end was slow, unsteady. You think you can silence me? You think you can take everything and leave me nothing? Charles frowned. Harry, what are you talking about? It's late. Where are you? But the voice grew sharper, colder, almost unrecognizable. You destroyed this family. You turned us into a circus. You made me into a villain in your story, and now you act like the victim? Son, please. No, you don't get to call me that anymore. Charles froze. For a moment, all he could hear was his son's breathing. Then, in a voice so calm it sent chills down his spine, Harry said it. I must kill you. A pause. You've left me no choice. Then, click. The line went dead. Charles sat motionless, the receiver still pressed to his ear, as if refusing to believe what he'd just heard. The sound of rain outside felt louder, harsher. The ticking clock in the corner suddenly deafening. He whispered to himself, Dear God, what do you do when your own child threatens your life? What happens when the man once called the spare becomes the storm? He wanted to call someone, William, perhaps, but something inside him stopped him. The father in him still hoped it was all a misunderstanding, that Harry had been drinking, or angry, or pushed to say something he didn't mean. But deep down, a darker thought took hold. What if he did mean it? Hours later, when the palace staff began arriving for the morning shift, they found their king sitting in the same spot. Still dressed in his robe, his eyes fixed on the silent telephone. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. By dawn, the story had spread quietly among his inner circle. The king's security chief, Commander Ridley, immediately ordered an internal review of all communications. A secret meeting was called. No aides, no public record, no transcripts. Within hours, the words Royal Threat Protocol appeared on official documents for the first time in modern history. But how do you treat a threat when it comes from your son? Charles refused to involve Scotland Yard. This is family, he said firmly. I will not have them dragged through headlines again. Yet, behind closed doors, the situation was anything but private. Camilla found him that morning sitting by the window, staring into the gray London dawn. She placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. What happened? He didn't answer at first. When he did, his voice broke. It was Harry. He said he must kill me. Camilla gasped, her face pale. Good heavens. Charles, are you sure? He nodded. I know his voice. I'd know it anywhere. And then she asked the question that had been circling his mind since the call ended. Was he alone? Because there had been something strange in the background of that call. A faint echo, a second breath, another whisper barely audible. Charles wasn't sure if it was imagination, or if someone else had been there, feeding his son's fury? That question would come back to haunt them all. Within the hour, William was called to the palace. He arrived in silence, his face tight, his jaw clenched. He had barely spoken to Harry in months, but he didn't need details. The look in his father's eyes told him everything. William's response was immediate and raw. He's gone too far this time. He needs to be stopped. Charles looked up, tired. He's your brother. William's voice cracked. No, father. He stopped being my brother the moment he threatened you. It was the first time in their lives the two men stood on opposite sides of something unthinkable, loyalty to blood versus loyalty to the crown. Outside the palace gates, reporters had no idea what was unfolding inside. But a few eagle-eyed journalists noticed something odd that morning. Extra security vehicles parked discreetly along the perimeter, armed officers positioned near entrances that were usually left unattended. Something was happening behind those walls, and the world could sense it. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Prince Harry woke up in his Montecito mansion to a barrage of missed calls and messages. His team of advisors looked nervous. Meghan sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through her phone, pretending not to notice. When his assistant asked, "Did you call your father last night?" Harry's expression hardened. He didn't answer. The assistant pressed again. "Sir, they're saying you said something threatening. They're saying it was recorded." Harry's hands clenched into fists. "They're twisting my words again. They always twist my words." But deep inside, something told him this time was different. Because he knew exactly what he'd said. And he knew the palace would never let it slide. Back in London, the king's advisors debated the next steps. Some urged discretion. Bury it, sir, before the press catches wind. Others demanded legal action. One voice, however, cut through the noise. Lord Chamberlain Whittaker. "Your Majesty," he said solemnly, "a threat to the crown, whether in jest or in rage, cannot go unrecorded. If we pretend it didn't happen, we invite anarchy." The room fell silent. Charles looked down at the table, his fingers trembling slightly. "And if I act?" he asked. Whittaker didn't hesitate. "Then history will call you a king who chose duty over blood." Those words hit harder than any headline ever could. The irony wasn't lost on Charles. His entire reign had been built on the promise of reconciliation, of healing old wounds. And now, he was faced with the choice of destroying his own family to save his crown. The weight of it was unbearable. Late that night, as he walked through the dark halls of Clarence House, Charles stopped before a portrait of a young Diana holding baby Harry. The brushstrokes seemed almost alive, her gentle eyes staring right back at him. He whispered, "What would you have me do, Diana? How do I save our boy?" But the painted silence offered no answers. Meanwhile, somewhere deep within palace security, an analyst replayed the call again and again. Every word, every pause, every breath. It was unmistakably Prince Harry's voice. But when they amplified the background, they heard something new. A second voice. A whisper. Soft. Female. British-American accent. The analyst froze the audio, played it again, slowed it down. And there it was, clear as day. A whisper that said, "Do it." The analyst's report went straight to the king's desk the next morning. When Charles read it, his hands went cold. He knew exactly who that second voice belonged to. Still, he hesitated to act. For decades, the royal family had survived by one rule: never explain, never complain. But this wasn't a tabloid scandal. This was treason cloaked in family drama. He needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof, before the crown took a stand. So he ordered a secret operation. Track every communication, every call, every encrypted message between Harry and anyone in his circle during the last 72 hours. The findings, when they arrived, made the king's blood run cold. There had been multiple encrypted calls between Harry's residence and a private server registered in Los Angeles, the same one used by a well-known streaming company. In other words, this wasn't just a personal meltdown. Someone was preparing to monetize it. It wasn't just betrayal. It was business. By now, William's fury had reached boiling point. He demanded to confront his brother face to face, despite his father's warnings. "If he wants war," William said, "then he'll have it from me." But Charles knew how dangerous that could be. "Leave it, William," he said quietly. "He's not the boy you remember." Still, William refused. And that decision would lead to the next major explosion in this saga. one that would soon be caught on secret recording. Because when the two brothers finally met again, for the first time in over a year, what began as a confrontation would end in violence. But that is the story waiting in the next chapter. Because before fists were raised and words were caught on tape, something else happened, something the world still doesn't know. Someone leaked the existence of the midnight call. By morning, the words threat, monarch, and royal son were spreading across encrypted journalist group chats from London to Los Angeles. And once the media caught a whiff of it, there would be no turning back. For the royal family, this wasn't just another scandal. It was the beginning of open warfare. And as the king stared out his window at the storm now raging outside, one thought haunted him, the same thought that would define the months to come. If his son truly wanted to destroy the royal family, he was already halfway there. The palace had always called him the Spare. It was never meant as an insult. At least, that's what they told themselves. But words have weight, and some crush more quietly than others. Prince Henry of Valemont had grown up under the golden glare of the monarchy. Every breath, every smile, every stumble recorded. He was the wild one, the unpredictable one, the one who made the tabloids money and the courtiers nervous. Yet somewhere behind the charm and defiance was a boy who never felt chosen. And maybe that was where it all began, with a single, simple wound, being born second. Because in a kingdom where firstborns were destiny, second sons were reminders. Reminders that life had an order, and that no matter how hard you tried, your crown would always belong to someone else. For years, Henry tried to outrun that truth. He joined the army, served on the front lines, fought like a man desperate to prove he mattered beyond his surname. He came back a decorated soldier and a changed man. The palace celebrated him. The press adored him. For a brief moment, the people whispered that maybe, just maybe, the Spare was becoming the hero. But when the cameras left and the medals stopped shining, Henry was left alone again, this time with the ghosts of his own choices. He started to resent everything, the rituals, the rules, the suffocating politeness of royal life. And that resentment became his oxygen. Then came her. Duchess Marin arrived in his life like a storm disguised as sunlight. A woman who looked him in the eye and said the one thing no one in his world ever dared to. You deserve more. At first, she was freedom, laughter, rebellion, escape. But soon, she became something else. The mirror that reflected back every bruise the monarchy had ever given him. She made him feel seen, said a palace insider. But she also made him feel angry, angrier than he'd ever been. Together, they built a life far from Valemont. Oceans away, cameras flashing, their smiles rehearsed for documentaries and deals. Yet the further Henry ran from the crown, the more he realized it was chasing him. He could still hear his father's voice, calm, measured, regal, calling him home. The people still love you, Henry. Don't burn what your mother built. But Henry didn't want reconciliation. He wanted reckoning. And that's when everything began to change. When the memoir came out, titled Shadowblood, the world finally heard Henry's version of history. Every page was an accusation. Every memory, a weapon. Every name, a scar. He described the palace as a prison. His brother as a rival who smiled for cameras but sneered behind doors. His father, King Alden, as a man who crowned himself over compassion. And perhaps most devastating of all, he painted Queen Alara, his stepmother, as a manipulator who rewrote history with a smirk and a signature. When the book hit shelves, the kingdom split in two. Some saw Henry as brave, a man breaking the silence of royal suffering. Others saw a traitor, a son who'd sold his soul for sympathy and streaming deals. Inside Valemont Palace, the reaction was quiet, too quiet. King Alden, sitting at his desk, turned one page after another, his face expressionless. When he reached the final chapter, he simply closed the book, set it aside, and said, "He's chosen his path." But the path Henry had chosen was darker than even the king imagined. Because as his fame grew, so did his fury. The interviews became bolder. The stories, sharper. He began speaking about restructuring monarchy, abolishing inherited privilege, ending dynastic hypocrisy. Words that sounded political, revolutionary even. And soon, the whispers began that Henry wasn't just venting. He was planning. At first, it was small things. Refusing royal invitations, boycotting state events, ignoring calls. Then it became larger. Private letters leaked. Confidential emails surfaced. And someone began feeding the media details about Valemont finances. Each leak chipped away at the monarchy's credibility. Each scandal fueled public anger. The palace was bleeding, and no one could stop it. Then came the first serious warning. A retired palace aide received a late-night message from an unknown number. It read, "He wants to destroy everything. He says he'll bring it all down, one revelation at a time." The aide dismissed it as gossip, until a week later, that same message appeared in the inbox of a royal journalist who specialized in intelligence leaks. Coincidence? Maybe. But within the palace, coincidence had become a luxury they could no longer afford. King Alden convened a private meeting with his top advisors. One of them, a longtime confidant, recalled the king's exact words. "My son's pain has turned into purpose, and his purpose is vengeance." The advisors urged the king to stay silent, to ride out the storm, as royals always did. But Alden knew this was different. Henry's rebellion wasn't external anymore. It was personal. Behind the polished smiles and charity speeches, the prince had become obsessed with the idea that his father had stolen not just his birthright, but his narrative. And that obsession soon turned to paranoia. Friends in California noticed changes. Henry spoke in riddles, referenced secret deals, claimed that the palace was spying on him through old friends and phone apps. He drank more, slept less, and lashed out at anyone who questioned him. Duchess Marin, ever the strategist, tried to manage the chaos. Publicly, she painted their lives as perfect, cozy family photos, interviews about healing, brand launches about mindfulness and compassion. Privately, insiders say she was losing control. She couldn't calm him anymore, one acquaintance said. He had this look in his eyes, a kind of feverish conviction that the entire world was conspiring against him. And maybe he was right, or maybe, by then, he'd already become his own enemy. Because when you're born into a dynasty that feeds on control, rebellion comes at a price. Soon, everything Henry touched turned volatile. Deals collapsed. Business partners backed out. Invitations disappeared. The media he once manipulated now mocked him. The kingdom that once adored him began to pity him. And that's when the anger reached its breaking point. He began calling his father again, first politely, then furiously. "You never loved me," he said in one voicemail. "You only loved what I could do for you." King Alden never replied. He believed silence was safer than words. But silence, to Henry, was rejection, and rejection was war. The more the king stayed quiet, the louder Henry became. He began using interviews not as conversations, but as confessions, each one more unfiltered than the last. When asked about his family, he smiled thinly and said, "They'll regret the day they made me the spare." It wasn't just bitterness anymore. It was warning. Those closest to him noticed something strange. He had started referring to himself not as the prince, but as the rightful one. When asked what he meant, he said cryptically, "One day, they'll understand who the real heir is." That line sent shivers through everyone who heard it, because it wasn't about succession. It was about destruction. What the public didn't know was that Henry had begun consulting with a controversial media producer known for weaponizing personal scandals into docudramas. Together, they began developing a secret project codenamed the House of Lies. Its premise? The monarchy as you've never seen it, unmasked by one of its own. Hidden cameras, leaked documents, private diaries, nothing was off limits. The goal was simple: to humiliate King Alden, dismantle Valemont's image, and make Henry the storyteller of royal truth. But there was one problem. Someone inside the palace found out. A spy, perhaps, or a conscience too burdened to stay silent. Because a single email from Henry's production partner, marked urgent, somehow landed in the inbox of a palace intelligence advisor. Its subject line read, "Final Act, Confrontation," and attached to it was a draft script, a recreation of a scene between father and son. In it, Henry's character confronted the king and said the now infamous line, "You took my life. I'll take yours." At first, the palace thought it was fiction, until the real phone call happened, word for word. Suddenly, the House of Lies wasn't entertainment. It was prophecy. And when the truth of that phone call began to leak, Henry realized he'd lost control of his own narrative. Because in trying to destroy his father, he had written the script for his own downfall. The irony was almost poetic. The spare, who wanted to reclaim his power, had become the very monster the monarchy warned him he might be. The boy who wanted love had turned into a man who demanded fear. And yet, despite everything, the king's heart was still torn. Because love doesn't vanish. It corrodes slowly, painfully, until all that's left is duty. King Alden knew he couldn't ignore the threat any longer. The safety of the crown, the integrity of the kingdom, they came before family now. He made his choice that night. Quietly, without ceremony, the legal teams were instructed to begin drafting papers. The crown would move forward. Not publicly yet, but officially. The era of forgiveness was over. As dawn broke over the palace, Alden looked out across the courtyard, the rain glinting on stone. He whispered to himself, "So this is what it means to lose a son." And far away in Montecito, a phone buzzed on Henry's nightstand. A message flashed on the screen from an anonymous source. "They're building a case against you." Henry stared at the words for a long time, his jaw tightening. Then he whispered to no one, "Let them try." Because in his mind, he wasn't the villain. He was the hero of his own revolution. But what came next would prove that revolutions don't always end in glory. Sometimes, they end in ruin. The storm over the capital of Eldoria hadn't stopped for 3 days. It was as though the heavens themselves were mourning something they could not yet name. Lightning clawed across the night sky as the royal motorcade cut through the rain toward a discreet government building, one that didn't appear on any public maps. Inside, King Aldrich waited in silence. His face, pale and drawn, reflected the light of the single lamp that flickered on the conference table. Around him sat only 3 people: his chief of security, General Rowan, his private secretary, Lord Tennies, and Dr. Lyra Venn, an intelligence analyst so trusted she alone was permitted to contradict the king. On the table lay a folder stamped in crimson ink, Level 7, Internal Threat. Aldrich didn't touch it. He simply said, "Tell me everything." General Rowan cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, our investigation confirms that the call came from Prince Henrik's personal communication line. There was no breach, no interception. It was deliberate." The king's jaw tightened. "So there's no possibility this was fabricated?" Dr. Venn hesitated. "We ran every voice print test available. It matches perfectly. But, sire, there's more." She pushed forward a small recording device. "We enhanced the background audio. There's another voice. Female, English Nordic accent. We believe it's Lady Mara." The room fell silent. Queen Isolde, seated quietly at the end of the table, shifted uneasily. "Mara? Are you certain?" "Yes, Your Majesty." And the words she whispered. Venn paused, lowering her voice. "Do it." The king closed his eyes. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of rain against the windows. When he finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. "I hoped it was madness. Now it sounds like malice." General Rowan opened the red folder. Inside were intercepted messages, travel logs, and fragments of an encrypted chat recovered from one of Henrik's assistants. The messages were short, coded, but chilling. "The plan advances. Crown will crumble soon." Rowan continued. "We've traced multiple communications from the prince's residence to an unlisted address in the southern provinces. It's being used as a broadcast studio, possibly for recording something." Lord Tennies leaned forward. "A documentary, perhaps? Or propaganda?" "Possibly both," Rowan replied. "Our sources say Henrik has been meeting with foreign journalists, promising to reveal the rot inside the throne." King Aldrich's hand trembled as he lifted a page from the file, a still image captured from surveillance footage. Henrik, stepping into a dark-windowed vehicle, Lady Mara beside him. He looked older, colder, and completely unrecognizable. "How did we reach this point?" Aldrich murmured. "I raised a son, not a weapon." Queen Isolde's voice quavered. "He's in pain, Aldrich. But Mara, she feeds that pain. She's brilliant, persuasive. She knows exactly which wounds to reopen." Dr. Venn added softly, "We believe Lady Mara's influence is strategic. She's aligning Henrik's personal resentment with her own ambitions. Her recent investments in foreign media companies suggest a larger agenda." Lord Tennies frowned. "Are you implying treason?" Venn met his eyes. "I'm implying orchestration." Aldrich stood slowly, walking toward the rain-streaked window. Outside, the storm raged on, thunder rolling over the palace like cannon fire. He said quietly, Summon the Privy Council tomorrow morning. The House of Eldoria must prepare for containment. Rowan stiffened. Containment, Your Majesty? Of my son, the king said, before he destroys more than just himself. Across the city, Prince Henrik stared at the glowing computer screen in his darkened study. His reflection looked like a stranger's. Eyes red, jaw tense, 1,000 sleepless nights carved into his face. Lady Mara stood behind him, her silk robe whispering as she moved closer. They'll come for you now, she said softly. Henrik didn't look up. Let them. I'm done running. You shouldn't have called him, she warned. Not yet. He slammed his fist on the desk. He needed to hear me, to understand what he's done. Mara's voice was calm, almost seductive. He doesn't understand anything except control. If you want to break him, don't shout. Expose him. Henrik's breathing steadied. Expose him how? She smiled faintly. The world adores kings until they see what they're hiding. And Aldrich's secrets are buried under decades of loyalty and fear. We'll dig them up. He turned to her, eyes burning. You're talking about war. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper. Revolution always sounds like war to those who fear it. Outside, thunder cracked so violently it rattled the windows. The next morning, the Privy Council convened in the Hall of Oaths, a vast, echoing chamber lined with portraits of Eldoria's past monarchs. The mood was tense, every whispered conversation charged with disbelief. King Aldrich entered in silence, his robe trailing behind him like a storm cloud. He carried the red folder beneath his arm. When he reached the dais, he placed it on the table and looked around at the faces before him. Ministers, nobles, military heads. He said simply, "You all know why we're here." A low murmur rippled through the room. Lord Marin, head of the council, spoke first. Your Majesty, if the rumors are true, we are dealing with the gravest crisis in centuries. A royal son turning against the throne. It's unthinkable. Unthinkable, Aldrich echoed, but undeniable. He opened the folder and pressed play on the recorder. The council members listened in horrified silence as Henrik's voice echoed through the hall, ending with the haunting whisper from Mara, "Do it." When it ended, no one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Lady Vin stepped forward. We've already increased security around the royal family. However, sire, I must advise immediate containment. If the recording leaks, public faith could collapse overnight. Containment, Lord Marin repeated grimly. You mean censorship? I mean survival, she replied. Aldrich rubbed his temples. I will not censor the truth, but I will not allow treachery to destroy the realm either. He turned to General Rowan. What are our options? Rowan hesitated. With your permission, we can place Henrik under discreet observation, limit his access to certain communications. No arrests yet, just control. Aldrich's voice hardened. Do it. The council members nodded, some relieved, others terrified. But deep inside, Aldrich knew it was already too late. Because while they sat arguing about surveillance, his son was already preparing his next move. 2 days later, the first leak appeared online. A mysterious account posted a short audio clip, just 6 seconds long. The words were faint, distorted, but unmistakable. You destroyed this kingdom. The post was deleted within minutes, but not before thousands of people downloaded it. By morning, every news outlet in Eldoria had picked it up. Palace crisis, leaked audio hints at royal rift. The damage was done. Inside the palace, chaos erupted. Advisors shouted, journalists swarmed the gates, and even loyal guards whispered about what was true. King Aldrich called another meeting. Find out who leaked it, he ordered. But before anyone could answer, a courier burst into the room carrying a black envelope. It was sealed with Henrik's personal crest. The king tore it open. Inside was a handwritten note. Father, you can hide behind your walls, your laws, and your lies. But truth is louder than crowns. Watch what happens next. H. The king's fingers tightened around the paper. That was a declaration, he said softly. Not of peace, of war. Queen Isolde touched his arm. What will you do? Aldrich looked at the envelope, then out toward the storm gathering once more over the horizon. What every king must do, he said. Defend the throne, even from his own. That evening, in an underground chamber below the palace, Dr. Lyra Vin gathered the king's top intelligence officers for what would later be called the briefing. Projected on the wall were intercepted documents, travel maps, and a list of foreign names connected to Lady Mara. She addressed the room calmly. We now believe Lady Mara is the architect of the rebellion. She's funding a digital network aimed at destabilizing the monarchy. Prince Henrik is both her weapon and her shield. The agents listened in silence as she revealed payment trails, offshore accounts, and coded messages linking Mara to several anti-monarchist factions. Ven concluded, this isn't a domestic issue anymore. It's international. If they succeed, Eldoria won't just lose a prince. It will lose its sovereignty. The king's face turned to stone. Then we stop them before they broadcast whatever they're planning. How? One agent asked. Aldrich looked around the room, eyes cold and resolute. By any means necessary. Lightning flashed outside again, illuminating the stained glass windows with crimson and gold, like the ghosts of kings past watching from another realm. The war for the crown had begun. Dawn broke over Eldoria like a wounded promise. Pale light slid across the marble spires of the royal palace, finding every crack, every unpolished corner the night had left behind. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was worse. Inside the palace, people whispered instead of walking. Footsteps softened. Doors closed halfway instead of slamming. Even the birds that nested along the terrace seemed to hesitate before singing. Something terrible had happened here, and the walls knew it. King Aldrich had not slept. He sat in the east drawing room still wearing last night's uniform, his crown abandoned on the side table beside a half-empty glass of water. His fingers drummed soundlessly against his knee. Across from him, Queen Isolde stood by the fireplace, staring into flames that refused to warm her. He was our boy, she said finally. Her voice sounded distant, as though it had traveled too far to reach him. Whatever else he's done, he was still that child who hid in your cloak during storms. Aldrich looked up, eyes dull. That boy died the moment he chose to shame the kingdom. Isolde flinched. You don't mean that. He did. At least part of him did. A servant entered quietly, carrying a silver tray of tea. Her hands shook as she poured, and when the cup rattled against the saucer, Aldrich realized the fear had spread beyond their private sorrow. Even the staff, generations of loyalty in their blood, no longer knew which family member it was safe to love. When the servant left, Isolde whispered, They're afraid of us now. Aldrich didn't answer. The fire popped and hissed. Down the corridor, Lady Vin waited outside the royal library with a folder pressed against her chest. She had brought new intelligence, details about Henrik's followers, the social unrest brewing in the city, but she hesitated to interrupt. The air felt wrong. The palace had changed overnight from a home into a mausoleum. She heard voices behind the door, muffled, tense. You think punishing him will fix this? Isolde demanded. He needs help, Aldrich, not chains. He threatened his king, Aldrich replied. He'll face consequences like any traitor. He threatened his father, she shot back. And fathers forgive. A chair scraped. The king's voice dropped to a whisper that still managed to fill the room. If I forgive him now, Isolde, there will be nothing left of this throne to pass on. Lady Vin stepped back from the door. She'd come to deliver news. Instead, she'd overheard a marriage cracking beneath the weight of a crown. By mid-morning, the palace corridors pulsed with rumor. Footmen traded glances instead of greetings. Maids lingered at windows, watching journalists gather beyond the gates. Each hour brought new headlines. Royal family in crisis. Prince Henrik vanishes. Palace silent. In the nursery wing, long unused, since the children were grown, Queen Isolde wandered alone. She stopped at Henrik's old room. The door creaked as she opened it. Dust floated in the light like lost years. On the desk still sat a wooden soldier carved by Aldrich himself, missing one arm from rough play. She picked it up, tracing the broken edge with her thumb. How did a boy who once begged to stay near his mother become a man who terrified her? From the hallway, Lady Vin found her there and hesitated. Your Majesty, the council awaits you, she said softly. Isolde turned, eyes shining. Do they talk of him like a criminal? Vin hesitated. They talk of stability. That word, stability, was poison disguised as medicine. It meant silence, denial, containment. It meant choosing the crown over the child. Isolde set down the wooden soldier. Tell them I'll come soon. In another wing of the palace, General Rowan inspected the guards. The once ceremonial hallways now held soldiers with real rifles. He hated the sight of it, but he obeyed orders. Every entrance locked, every visitor screened, he barked. No exceptions, not even family. One guard hesitated. Sir, Lady Mara was seen at the north gate this morning. Rowan froze. Alone. With 2 vehicles. Claimed she came to return property to His Majesty. Did you let her in? No, sir. She left before we could confirm. Rowan cursed under his breath. Lady Mara near the palace? After the threat? He grabbed a radio. Double patrols. If she steps within a mile of these walls again, I want eyes on her. But as the order crackled through the channel, a small voice of doubt whispered in his head. Was it really her? Or was someone trying to make the palace panic even more? By noon the council meeting began. Ministers filled the royal chamber like anxious students summoned to confession. Aldrich entered last, followed by Queen Isolde, who refused to sit beside him. Lord Marin rose. Your Majesty, the people are restless. Markets are trembling. They want reassurance. Then reassure them, Aldrich said. With respect, sire, they need to hear it from you. The king stared at the portraits lining the walls. Ancestors who had faced invasions, famines, coups. None of them had faced betrayal by their own blood. He stood slowly. Citizens of Eldoria will not see their monarch unravel in panic. We will hold our composure. And the prince? A minister asked. Aldrich's voice was steady but brittle. Prince Henrik remains under investigation. Until the truth is proven, he is neither condemned nor forgiven. The words sounded fair. They were anything but. Across the table, Isolde whispered, You've already judged him. The king turned, eyes full of sorrow and steel. No, I've simply accepted what he's become. That single sentence broke something in her. She rose abruptly, leaving the chamber without bowing. The doors closed behind her with a sound that echoed far longer than it should have. That night, the palace felt emptier than ever. Candles burned down to stubs. The staff moved like shadows. In the royal study, Aldrich stared at a photo on his desk. Henrik and his brother as children, mud on their boots, laughter frozen in time. The queen had not spoken to him since the meeting. He whispered to the photograph, If I lose her too, then the throne wins and I lose everything. He didn't notice the letter slipped under his door until hours later. No seal, no handwriting he recognized. He unfolded it cautiously. Your Majesty, if you still believe Henrik can be saved, meet me at the East Chapel before dawn. Come alone. There was no signature. He read it twice, then set it down. Could it be a trap? Almost certainly. But a father's hope can outvote a king's caution. He didn't tell anyone. Queen Isolde lay awake in her chamber, listening to the rain start again. Every drop against the window sounded like footsteps fading away. She rose, walked to the balcony, and looked toward the East Chapel. A small silhouette against the gardens. She saw a single lantern light flicker inside. Her heart seized. Aldrich. Without thinking, she threw on her cloak and ran. The East Chapel was cold, filled with the smell of damp stone and old prayer books. Aldrich stepped inside, lantern in hand. Henrik, his voice echoed. Silence answered him. Then, footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting his son. Instead, a figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked, hood drawn low. When the stranger spoke, the voice was soft, female. You shouldn't have come alone, Your Majesty. Who are you? Aldrich demanded. The figure lowered her hood. It wasn't Mara. It was one of Henrik's childhood tutors, a woman dismissed years ago for reasons never made public. Her eyes glistened with fear. They've gone too far, she whispered. Henrik doesn't understand what he's become part of. Mara isn't acting for love. She's acting for power. Aldrich stepped closer. Where's my son? Before she could answer, the chapel door burst open. Queen Isolde stood framed in the rain, gasping for breath. Aldrich, what are you doing? The tutor froze. You brought her? They'll know I came. A loud crash interrupted her. The stained glass window behind the altar shattered inward, scattering color and light. A small black device rolled across the floor, blinking red. Down! Aldrich shouted, pulling Isolde behind the pew. The device exploded not with fire, but with light. A blinding flash and the sharp crack of glass and metal. When the smoke cleared, the tutor was gone. Only the echo of her warning remained. In the ringing silence, Aldrich heard her last words in his mind. She's acting for power. He turned to Isolde, eyes burning. They're inside the palace. From somewhere beyond the shattered window came the distant sound of sirens and shouting guards. The queen gripped his hand. What have we done, Aldrich? The king looked at her, then at the ruins of the chapel. We've started a war inside our own home. And somewhere out there, under the same storm that drenched the capital, Prince Henrik watched the distant glow of the palace fire through binoculars, his expression unreadable. The rain had stopped, but Lady Mara kept the curtains drawn. She liked the sound of water drying on glass. It reminded her that even storms had to bow to patience. The villa overlooking Elder Bay was silent except for the rhythmic scratch of her pen across paper and the faint ticking of an antique clock imported from the palace years ago, back when she was still a welcome guest. On the page, she wasn't writing a letter or confession. She was drawing a map, not of cities or borders, but of people, names connected by looping lines, arrows of influence, pockets of loyalty. At the center sat a single initial, H. Prince Henrik. The ink bled slightly where she pressed too hard. She smiled. "You'll thank me one day," she murmured. Across the room, the prince paced barefoot, phone in hand, face pale with exhaustion. "They're saying I've disappeared," he said. "Reporters at the gates, soldiers everywhere. They think I've fled the country." "You should have," Mara replied without looking up. Henrik stopped pacing. "You told me to stay." "I told you to wait," she corrected, setting the pen down. "Waiting isn't the same as hiding. It's strategy. Let them drown in their own panic first." He threw himself into a chair. "You talk like this is a chess game." "It is," she said simply. "And your father taught you to play only defense. I'm teaching you offense." The prince exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "You make it sound easy." "It's not easy," Mara said. "It's inevitable." Once, before the scandals and the threats, Lady Mara had been a scholar of diplomacy. The palace archives still held her doctoral thesis, Charm as a Weapon, Influence in Modern Monarchies. She'd written it long before she met Henrik, long before she became the woman the tabloids now called the Serpent of Valemont. But even serpents start as creatures of survival. She had grown up in the border province of Varen, where nobles forgot the names of the villages they owned. Her father had been a schoolteacher who believed merit could bend destiny. He was wrong. When the mines collapsed and the crown delayed aid, he died coughing stone dust, and no one from the capital came to bury him. That was the first time Mara learned what power really meant, being heard after silence. Years later, when the young Prince Henrik began visiting university lectures under disguise, she recognized in him the same hunger she carried, the craving to be seen beyond title or circumstance. Their first conversation lasted 6 hours. He quoted philosophers. She dismantled them. By dawn, he looked at her the way people look at the horizon, with awe and fear. From that moment, she knew she could shape him. But shaping was never the end goal. It was preparation. Now, as Henrik paced before her, voice trembling between rage and love, Mara saw the cracks forming exactly where she wanted them. "They've turned the guards against me," he muttered. "Even my brother refuses to answer calls." "Then stop calling him," she said. "Every plea makes you smaller. Every silence makes him doubt himself. Let silence do the talking." He frowned. "Silence doesn't win wars." "It does," she said, "if it's followed by thunder." He looked at her. "And what's the thunder?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Truth, but told at the right volume. Later that evening, she met secretly with 2 of her confidants in the villa's wine cellar, an engineer named Kale and a journalist called Dora Vale. Both owed Mara debts of gratitude and fear. "The recording is everywhere now," Dora said. "People believe it's real, but no one has heard the full version." "Good," Mara replied. "Let rumor do the work." Truth is too tidy. Rumor breeds allegiance. Kale leaned forward. "What's next?" Mara unrolled a sheet of vellum across the table. It showed a simple timeline divided into 3 stages. Expose the rot. Claim the narrative. Rebuild the kingdom. Kale whistled. "Ambitious. Necessary," she said. Stage 1 is complete. The palace is already devouring itself. Stage 2 begins tonight. "And the prince?" Dora asked. Mara's expression softened, or pretended to. "He believes he's freeing the people. That's why he'll never see the strings." For a moment no one spoke. The candles flickered, throwing long, thin shadows over the walls. "You actually care for him, don't you?" Dora asked quietly. Mara's eyes hardened. "Care is a luxury. I believe in purpose." She dismissed them with a flick of her hand. When they were gone, she poured herself a glass of wine and stared at the empty chair across from her. "I gave you purpose, Henrik," she whispered. "Don't ruin it with feelings." That night she found him on the balcony overlooking the city. The lights of Elder Bay shimmered like scattered gold below, beautiful and indifferent. Henrik leaned on the railing, hair damp with fog. "They hate me now," he said. "Every paper, every broadcast. I thought telling the truth would make me free." Mara joined him. "Freedom is messy. It's the space between being hated and being heard." He turned to her, eyes glassy. "Sometimes I think I've become exactly what he said I'd be. Reckless, emotional, unfit." "Then prove him wrong," she said. "How?" She stepped closer until her breath brushed his ear. "By taking what he never thought you'd dare claim." He turned to face her. "The throne. The story," she said. "Once the world believes your version, the throne follows naturally." Henrik stared at her, uncertain whether she was visionary or venom. "You talk like you've done this before." "In another life," she said softly. He didn't ask what she meant. When he finally slept, Mara returned to her desk. She opened a locked drawer and took out a stack of letters, dozens of them, written in the king's own hand. They were years old, back when Aldrich still trusted her as an advisor. She read the first few lines of one aloud. "My dear Lady Mara, your counsel has been invaluable. I believe you understand this family better than any outsider ever could." She smirked. "Oh, I understand you, Aldrich. That's what frightens you." She placed the letters into a single folder marked "The Archive." It was her insurance policy. If the kingdom turned against her, she would burn its myth from within. As dawn approached, a new plan formed in her mind, one bold enough to ensure her name would be remembered, not reviled. She would orchestrate a meeting between father and son, but on her terms. A reunion staged, recorded, and released to the world as the ultimate revelation. The tyrant king facing the truth of his broken heir. In that version of history, Henrik would appear sincere, wounded, noble. Aldrich would look cold, calculating, distant. And Mara? She would not appear at all. That was the art of influence, being the silence that shapes every sound. She drafted a message to the palace under an anonymous signature. For reconciliation's sake, His Majesty should meet his son privately at dawn in the old arboretum. No press, no guards, only truth. She pressed send and exhaled. The bait was cast. Hours later, as sunlight crept through the curtains, Henrik woke to find her watching him. "You look like someone waiting for confession," he said. "Perhaps I am," she replied. "Today decides everything." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've arranged something." Suspicion flashed in his eyes. "Without telling me?" "Trust me." He hesitated. "That's what you said before the recording." Mara stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest. "That recording made the world listen. This meeting will make them choose." He swallowed. "And if he refuses to come?" Her smile was soft and terrible. "He won't." By afternoon, the city buzzed with new rumors. Someone had leaked a hint that the king might meet the exiled prince. The streets near the palace filled with onlookers and journalists. Mara watched it unfold on the villa's television, fingers tapping rhythmically against her glass of wine. Every headline said the same thing. Hope for reconciliation. She laughed. Hope is the easiest word to weaponize. Behind her, Henrik appeared in the doorway, already dressed for travel. "You really think he'll come?" "I know he will," she said. "And after?" "After," she replied. "History takes sides." But when night fell, Mara found herself restless. For the first time in years, doubt crept in, thin but insistent. What if Henrik didn't follow the script? What if the king refused his lines? She tried to read, to write, to drink. Nothing silenced the noise inside her head. Finally, she went to the garden. The air smelled of wet stone and jasmine. She stared at the moon and whispered, "I built you into a legend, Henrik. Don't make me your villain." The wind carried back no promise, only the faint echo of approaching thunder from the east, over the palace grounds. She turned toward the sound, heart quickening. Lightning flashed, illuminating the distant silhouette of the old arboretum. Something was happening sooner than planned. Her phone buzzed on the bench beside her. A single message appeared from an unknown number. "The king came early. You might want to see this." She froze. Another flash of lightning split the sky. For a second, she thought she saw smoke rising in the distance. Then a second message arrived, 3 words that drained the color from her face. He knows everything. Mara stared at the screen until the rain began again, washing away the last warmth from her hands. She whispered to herself, half in fear, half in fascination, so the game finally sees its board. She turned toward the villa, grabbed her cloak, and started walking into the storm. Far away, in the royal corridors, alarms began to sound. The meeting at the Arboretum had not gone as planned, and this time, neither king nor prince would be able to hide what the world was about to witness. Wilhelm hears that his father's secret dawn meeting with Henrik at the old Arboretum ended in chaos. The tutor who tried to warn them is missing, the chapel destroyed, the king injured but alive. The palace hums with suspicion. Wilhelm storms through the corridors demanding answers. He overhears generals discussing the possibility